Good evening, Who Dat Nation, and happy Wednesday to our Bayou Blitz family. I hope to God the saying is true that April showers bring May flowers, because I am sick of this. I'm sure a lot of you are too. Prayers and safe wishes, to those that have dealt with the flooding in Western Pennsylvania, and prayers and safe wishes to those of you in the Gulf Coast region who are dealing with tornadoes and flooding and everything else down there, probably as we speak. So hopefully you're catching your Bayou Blitz telecast this evening, safe, warm, dry, and happy. And on that note, I am Bob Rose. I am one of your co-hosts to your Bayou Blitz. Joining me is and you look happy, safe, and dry, Brendan. Brendan Boylan, how are you tonight?
Yeah, do I bring up the fact that I just got back from Florida? It was like 80 degrees, no rain. No. Oh, I already did.
No.
Oops. No, I'm
No,
great.
otherwise you're getting the patented Rose number 11 flashed at you.
Yeah, I can't be doing that today. Not
No.
on this show. Not on this show. But I'm good. I'm great. It was a nice trip down to Florida to take care of some cake tasting and food sampling and get some things together for the wedding. So that was a nice trip. The weather treated us well, and it was a good couple days with Mr. and Mrs. Mouse down in Orlando at Disney World. So uh, happy, healthy, and well. The showers have certainly started to hit us here in Charlotte. So I hope everybody who's dealing with much more severe rain and flooding, like Bob said, is staying safe. As we kind of hit a weird time in the weather schedule for everybody. Um, but with that, let's be honest, Bob. The Saints news has been a little stale, maybe a little dry lately, but that is expected. We figured for the most part it was going to be a pretty quiet offseason up until draft time, which we're going to start kind of talking about a little bit more in depth as we're 3 weeks away
Mm-hmm.
from the draft, almost 3 weeks on the dot, right? So I think the biggest thing that I want to kind of dive into today, Bob, is, and it's right there on the bottom, how can the Saints make this a perfect off season? And perfect is a word that gets thrown around in media and by sports minds alike uh, very often. And maybe it's a phrase or a word that is overused. However, I feel like for maybe the last three off seasons, maybe four, we've talked a lot about it being a crucial offseason for the Saints, perhaps the most important offseason in franchise history. Like I feel like we've just had this record stuck on repeat. And I don't think it was that drastic this year. I think last year was very much a prior to getting Derek Carr, like this is a offseason that could define the Saints moving forward. I think we're kind of at a crossroads or a fork in the road for the organization at this point. Not as drastic as it was last year, where if the Saints didn't get a quarterback, you were really concerned about the Saints being potentially, team that was drafting in the top 5
Mm-hmm.
because that's how bad the offense was. Now, say what you will about Derek Carr, and Bob and I have discussed this at length, so I won't go too much further into it. But Carr played well enough to keep this team in playoff contention. So, with that, you're at a crossroads because at some time, you got to pay the piper.
Mm-hmm.
You were on a show earlier this week, Sports That's You Fake, kind of talking about, well, this is a team that continues to restructure, and the people that have been in the media and the people that have been fans of this team for a long time kind of knew what the outline for the first few weeks of the offseason was going to look like. And the Saints have kind of hit it par for the course. Now, they go get Clint Kubiak. You get the little bit of a surprise signing in Chase Young. Tip my hat to you, Mr. Rose, who kind of called that in terms of the interest and that it was a real possibility. But at what point do you, like I said, have to pay the piper? At what point does this thing kind of blow up and end? And as long as the Saints are in contention, I think this is going to continue to be a conversation every offseason. So with that, how can the Saints perfect this and continue to avoid paying the piper and find themselves in true NFC South playoff contention this upcoming season? Bob, there's a lot of holes on this team. But to start the conversation, how close are the Saints realistically to being a team that can find themselves back in the playoffs next year?
Brendan, I think they are close, and they certainly believe that they are close. That's why they haven't blown this thing up. And the reason that I say that I believe that they're close is, realistically, they were one missed field goal away, or one defensive breakdown away, or one poor start, reversing a poor start away. In other words, they were literally one game out of winning the NFC South and hosting a playoff game. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers instead won the NFC South, and they won that first round game and advanced to the divisional playoffs and nearly pulled off an upset. And I think that we all believe that at least last year's version of the New Orleans Saints was at least every bit as good as last year's version of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, if not better by the end of by the stretch run. The Saints haven't lost anybody significant off of last year's team. Now I think it's very significant that you have players like Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Alvin Kamara, etc., all a year older, and a year either further past their prime or a year towards the end of their prime, depending on your outlook, of it. And like you said, even last year's Saints team that was playing pretty well, pretty good football down the stretch, they had some very clear holes. So I think the first thing that you have to do, you have to address those holes. And I mean more than just on paper. Oh, the Saints got a tackle. The Saints got an edge rusher in Chase Young. The Saints got a running mate, for Demario Davis and Willie Gay. The Saints fortified their receiving core in the draft. Whatever on paper adjective and description you want to put onto it, the moves that they make, that they have made so far and will make in the draft, they have to pay off. Because more so than just a crossroads for this franchise, as you brought up, it's a crossroads for a lot of people in this organization. I said it before, and I'll say it again, a ton of jobs are on the line. Dennis Allen's and the rest of that coaching staff, potentially veterans like Cam Jordan, Alvin Kamara, Demario Davis, Marshawn Lattimore. Those are just the names off the top of my head. Those the cans that they keep kicking down the road. If they decide to totally revamp this thing because of another disappointing season, then those are players that we could potentially see playing their last year as a New Orleans Saint. And I know that's difficult to grasp your mind around, but as you said to open the show, and you said several times this offseason, you got to pay the piper eventually. Will eventually be after the 2024 season. Only time will tell, and only performance on the field will dictate whether that does or does not happen.
There we go. You think they're close. I'm with you. And we've said the last few years the Saints have missed the playoffs, that they were an unfortunate bounce away. Now, good teams, and how many times have we talked about how this was a bad football team? A lot. And I think we got some scrutiny for it. But I think we're right, and have been right, is good football teams find ways to win games to where an unfortunate bounce of the ball does not dictate whether you make the playoffs.
Yep.
The Saints have not been a good team over the last few years. They've been mediocre at best. The record is shown. The week-to-week play has shown. The inconsistencies have shown. Right? But I think this is kind of a catch-22 because the Saints do have some massive holes. And we'll get into that. But we're not talking about the Saints being a team that could make the playoffs because they're good or like they're a super well running machine right now. We're talking about that because the NFC South is that bad right now. And I do think the Saints could find themselves in a position to win the NFC South. Now, I don't know what the current odds are. I guess I could look them up. But at one point, the Falcons this offseason were the favorites to win the NFC South. I don't know if that's still the odds. But they were like minus 100, maybe minus 200 to win the NFC South, which I don't know. I've always been in the favor of the team that just won the division or the team that just won the championship should be the betting odds favorite to repeat, not a team that finished as bad as the Falcons did.
Right.
But what do I know? I am not a sports book. With that said, I think that also says something, right? Like the Falcons, up until getting Kirk Cousins, like they went into this offseason not knowing who their quarterback was and have massive holes at multiple positions and don't really have a true identity and what the heck happened with Bijan last year and lack of touches. Like there's a lot of things with the Falcons that are still up in the air, but yet they're the betting odds favorite to win the NFC South. So if the Falcons can be viewed that way, why can the Saints not be viewed that way? Right? So that's where I am with this team. But with that said, they have a lot of gaping holes.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some holes they didn't expect to have because of some of the injuries. Ryan Ramczyk, the biggest one. So with that, Bob, holes. A team that at times, and especially the last game of the season, showed that this can be a fun offense.
Mm-hmm.
Last game of the season, we're all looking at each other going, whoa, where's this been? Like, this is fun. Like, Saints team scoring 40 points. Like, we could get used to this again. There was a defense that at times proved they could still be a top 10 defense in the league. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the inconsistencies and not knowing what you're getting week to week is the true definition of what this team has been for the last 3 years. So with that, Bob, yes, tackle is a giant concern right now.
Yeah.
But when you look at this team, where are some other positions that kind of stick out to you, whether it be a sore thumb or whether it's hiding a little bit in the shadows of being a hole that the Saints need to patch up, whether it be here late in free agency or in the draft?
Wide receiver stands out to me. And it's not because I don't like what they have on the team. I love Chris Olave. I love Rashid Shaheed. I love A.T. Perry. I just don't think they have enough of it. I am not nearly as down on the signing of Cedric Wilson as a lot of Saints fans. Saints fans, you need to turn on the film of Cedric Wilson a couple of years ago when he was with the Dallas Cowboys, rather than him sitting the bench and just flat out not being used with the Miami Dolphins. I think the Saints got themselves a capable receiver. But what I see, or what I don't see on this roster, is a pass catcher, that is going to be a consistent security blanket for Derek Carr. The guy that you can look to on third downs, the guy that everybody in the stadium and everybody watching on television knows that the ball is coming to in key situations, and you still can't stop it. A guy like a Travis Kelce, a guy like a George Kittle, a guy like a Jamar Chase, a Justin Jefferson, a guy like the Saints had a couple of years ago in Michael Thomas. Just that kind of physical presence that could be potentially dominant in the intermediate routes. Now, A.T. Perry is a big guy, but that's not necessarily his type of game. And I don't necessarily think that it has to be a big imposing physical presence. Just a a player, a pass catcher, be it tight end or wide receiver, just a pass catcher that knows how to get open, knows how to get separation, and is reliable in key situations through those intermediate zones, be it a slot specialist or a bigger player at tight end or wide receiver. And there's a handful of them in this draft, both available in the early rounds and potentially even late into day 2 or early into day 3. That's one position that stands out. Another, defensive tackle. And you and I have brought it up a couple of times. Not nearly enough people are talking about it enough. Brian Bresee, I believe, is going to be a hell of a player. I believe already is a very good player. Nathan Shepard, he's good for what the Saints need him to do. But the Saints need a real space eater, a guy that's whose mere stature commands double and triple teams, because what that's going to do, that's going to leave single blocking opportunities for Bresee, for your edge rushers who we know struggled a great deal last year. You need a safety. I like Jordan Howden, but he's still unproven to me. I like the way Tyrann Mathieu played last year, but to me, he's lost a step, and he has some limitations to his game now. And most importantly, behind Mathieu and Howden, there's nothing on this depth chart that excites me. Jonathan Abram, good inside the box, physical player. Don't want him in coverage. You go Amadi, a real effort player, real high effort player. Love the effort that he's going to give to you play after play, but he's not the kind of guy that you want in your defensive rotation at safety real often. He's kind of a fill-in guy, special teams contributor, something like that. So they need a safety too. And last but not least, I still put edge rusher on this list of needs. Now I say that acknowledging that the answers could be on the roster, and we've talked about it here before, there's a lot of ifs. If Cam Jordan can bounce back to the Cam Jordan that we've come to expect, if Chase Young recovers from neck surgery, and B, shows why he was the number 2 overall draft choice in 2020. If Isaiah Foskey can be the player I thought he could be when the Saints drafted him last year, if Carl Granderson continues his upward trend after a breakout season, and if Peyton Turner can actually stay on the field. That's a whole lot of ifs, and not a lot of concrete answers for that position. So while I will acknowledge that the Saints may not take an edge rusher in this draft, they're rolling the dice with what they have on the roster. And then, last but not least, we mentioned tackle. I'm going to put the whole offensive line on that list of needs. I think they need more than just one tackle. They need either potentially 2 tackles or a tackle and a guard. One guy that can step in and play at a high level on day 1, and another guy who could potentially, if not play on day 1, then at least challenge for James Hurst for a starting job, or challenge Trevor Penning or Ryan Ramczyk. Trevor Penning for a starting job, or be able to fill in for Ryan Ramczyk if he doesn't play. As you said at the top of the show, that's a pretty big list of needs. We listed just about every position.
Yeah. And I think the unfortunate thing is, for a lot of fans, because this team was so close to making the playoffs the last however many years, sometimes you almost brainwash yourself into thinking this team is a lot better than they are, or a lot deeper than they really are.
Mostly, but not our fan base. Our fan base, you'd think they went 1-15, a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of people saying this is the worst Saints team ever, and you have to go, I wasn't around either, but you got to go back to the Archie days, and then try to talk about how bad of a team this is. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. A lot of people in my generation that grew up in the Peyton and Breeze era, or maybe like the tail end of the Hazlitt and Brooks era, is you're really spoiled and watching pretty good football over the years. And I've said this before too, as much hate as Aaron Brooks gets from the fan base, like, can't tell me you wouldn't have taken Aaron Brooks over the 5 quarterbacks that started for the Saints after Drew Brees. Outside of, I'm biased, but maybe I take Jameis Winston over, Aaron Brooks. But still, I mean, like Trevor Siemian, Andy Dalton, like, those guys are guys that, yeah, yeah. And Andy Dalton got a lot of hate too. I think he actually played, he played okay. He was an average quarterback. The Andy Dalton line, like that's what Andy Dalton played, the Andy Dalton line for the New Orleans Saints. But I digress. I'm glad you said pass catcher, and specifically a guy that you can rely on and count on, whether it be third down, red zone, when you just need someone to come up with a big catch, right? And I'm glad you said that because you think back to last year and you think about the people, you and I included, that were week after week going, where the hell is Jimmy Graham? It's because the Saints desperately needed that. And you look at the numbers, and Jimmy didn't do a whole lot, right? Love Jimmy Graham. But he didn't do a whole lot. He had less than 10 catches on the year. I think he had 6 total, maybe 7. Like, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think he had 6 total catches during the year. 4 of them went for touchdowns. Somebody check me on that in the chat.
I was thinking 8 and 6 touchdowns, but you could be right with the 6 and 4. The ratio was ridiculous. I know that.
He had two catches that were not touchdowns. The rest of them were touchdowns. But and again, somebody in the chat, if you want to double check me, and Bob, please do. But I go to that point because that's how much the Saints missed that last year, that we're calling for a guy who was out of football to be in on third down, to be there in the red zone, because the Saints desperately missed a player who will just go get it. Now, Jimmy Graham, very, very large human being at 6'8", former power forward. But to what Bob said, you don't need that. You don't necessarily need a guy of that size and stature. You just need a guy who's going to have sure hands. We'll go to the other end of the spectrum, a guy that was a Jimmy Graham teammate the first stint, right? You can have a guy Jimmy Graham size, or you can have a guy like Lance Moore, not that big of a dude, but you needed a crucial catch on third down, and you could go to Lance Moore. That brings me to Hunter Renfrow. Maybe we save that for another time, but he's still available. God, bring him in. Just bring him in. If he doesn't make the team, so be it, but bring him in. That's a guy on third down, short yardage that will get open. He's a great route runner. I'll save that whole spiel and whatnot for another time. But like, that is a really big need for the Saints offensively. It's something they desperately missed. Is the answer on the roster? Like you said, potentially. Maybe, if A.T. Perry has a huge jump, if Juwan Johnson kind of goes back to his form from a few years ago, like, maybe you have that on the roster. But I look at it right now and I go, there's not a guy. As much as I want to push Chris Olave into that spot, and I certainly think he has the capability of being that guy, it's really hard for me to do that for a third-year guy, even with the numbers that Olave's put up this year. And you guys know, you day one Bayou Blitz people, or even further than that, you day one Bob and Brendan draft special people, know that we were Chris Olave people well before he was projected to the Saints in that draft. And we knew what kind of talent he was coming out of Ohio State. I think he has all the potential to be that guy.
Yeah.
Is he ready for that weight on his shoulders? Maybe. But I don't want to throw all that weight on his shoulders right this second either. Wilson was a good pickup. Like you said, you go back, you throw on the Dallas tape. You don't need him to be anything crazy. You just need him to be an option, right? We're talking about a guy who's going to compete for the third or fourth receiver spot. But I think that's a really underrated need, and I'm glad that was the first thing out of your mouth, because I think that is a super duper underrated need. Is just a reliable guy to go to.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said, and I completely believe too that Chris Olave has that capability. But you look at what Chris Olave does well. He's a playmaker. He's a guy that can make plays down the field. He's a guy that makes plays in space. The type of player I'm talking about is the type of a Michael Thomas in his prime, the type of guy that will make the play with three guys hanging all over him when he runs a route that everybody in the stadium knows is coming. If you ask Chris Olave to do that, Chris Olave has a slighter frame, so he's going to take a beating. Maybe he misses a couple games. And you're also taking away what Chris Olave does best, making plays in open space. You get a type of guy like a Jimmy Graham, a type of guy like a Marcus Colston, a Michael Thomas, a Lance Moore. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a big giant guy, big giant player, just a player that works those intermediate routes. That's going to cause the defense to react to that player. When that does, that drops a safety down, and all of a sudden, Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, A.T. Perry one of them at least are going to get one-on-one coverage down the field, and I will take those odds any day of the week.
And on top of that, when it comes to playmakers, difference makers. If you guys saw the thumbnail for today's episode, it was an old friend that I haven't thrown on the thumbnail on in a long time. And that was Taysom Hill. Bob, we've kind of alluded to the need of a go-to guy on third down. We've talked a little bit about Juwan Johnson's inconsistencies. We've talked a little bit about what do you do if Brock Bowers falls. With all that said, how does Taysom Hill fit into this new offense?
I'm not sure yet. I believe, and Clint Kubiak is a very smart guy. Rick Dennison is a very smart guy. We're talking about two coaches that have had a lot of success in this league, running NFL offenses. So they will figure out a way to use Taysom Hill. I don't know how that's going to be. I have a feeling it's going to be in very similar ways to the way Pete Carmichael used Taysom Hill, to the way Sean Payton used Taysom Hill. And as much as I love Taysom, he is not elite in any one trait. We know he's not an elite quarterback. He's never been used as a traditional running back. He is not an elite tight end, not an inline tight end. He's not an elite receiver. What he does do, he does do a lot of those things that I just mentioned very well. He makes defenses react to him when he's on the field. And another thing that we all know about Taysom Hill is whatever the coaches tell him to do, he's going to bust his ass and then some, trying to do it, trying to learn that particular craft as best he can, and master it as best he can. So I still expect the jack of all trades, Swiss Army knife type of player that we have seen from Taysom Hill. And Clint Kubiak, he's going to try to find unique ways to use Taysom. But don't tell me, and when I write about the tight ends for the New Orleans Saints, I rarely mention Taysom Hill as a tight end. I lump him more with the backs, with the running backs, with the backfield weapons, because that's where Taysom Hill is most effective. But he is effective as a move tight end, as an H-back, for you older football fans, and out of the slot as well. So we're going to see him continue to line up all over the field, and continue to see him used as a versatile weapon against defenses in multiple ways week after week. I don't think that changes much about the Taysom Hill factor.
For me, Taysom Hill at this point is it's kind of like a wingback, like in a wing T type of offense. Like it's kind of what he is. Like he'll catch a few passes. He's gonna run the ball a handful of times a game, but just like H or wingbacks in the wing T that try to make that jump to pro football, you don't really know like where they fit. or what they are, almost a glorified fullback. That's kind of what Taysom is at this point. And while I definitely trust Taysom to put his nose down and get 2 yards if you need it, Taysom's not the guy I'm trusting if you are looking downfield and it's 3rd and 5 and you need somebody to catch a pass, right? So again, I think that's a really underrated need for the Saints. Let's stay on the offensive side of the ball. Offensive line. And I say offensive line because you were the one who said it's not just tackle. Let's not forget Nick Saldiveri didn't get a whole lot of time with the Saints last year, but was a 4th-round pick out of Old Dominion, a guy that they felt like could move and play a couple different places. Interested to see with a full training camp for him, what is that going to look like? Because remember, he battled injuries all year last year. With that said, though, there are a couple guys that could be at 14 that could help the Saints, albeit some interior, some some interior guards and some exterior tackles. But without talking about a position, in your mind, in the Bob Rose draft guide of 2024, who is the highest rated offensive lineman that you could see falling to 14, A, and B, who is your favorite prospect at this point? Because it could change between now and draft time. We still got 3 weeks. Today, April 10th, who is your favorite offensive line prospect? And make the case to me and the people, the over 100 people watching with us live, why the Saints should get
Olu Fashanu, the left tackle at Penn State. I watched this guy on pass plays, and Penn State ran. James Franklin runs an offense designed by a caveman. Because James Franklin is a Neanderthal type of thinker. If someone needs to explain the concept of the forward pass to the Penn State coaching staff. But having said that, when Penn State did pass, Fashanu, in my opinion, even over Joe Alt at Notre Dame, Fashanu is the most polished pass blocker in this tackle class. He has the potential to move over to the right side, in my opinion, but he played the left side his last 3 years at Penn State. I watched this guy pass block, and he reminds me of Teron Armstead. I know that's a heavy comparison, and nobody likes to do it, yet everybody does it. Everybody likes to make pro comparisons to college players because, that's what we do. But when I watch Fashanu pass block, he looks like Teron Armstead. Now, I would love to see Olu use his physical advantages a little bit more, use his strength, use his power better in the run game. But the potential is there. Again, Penn State. You talk about a single T or a wing T formation. That's basically what the idiot known as James Franklin runs. At Penn State is a modified version of that. So Fashanu run blocks a lot. So it's not that he's raw or inexperienced in that area. It's just that I would like to see him use his power a little bit more. But I just got done saying he's the most polished pass blocker, in this draft class. And even with saying that, I think he has tremendous upside. There's a few tackles I really love in this draft. Fuaga from Oregon State is another guy that I really love. But if every single person draft eligible is on the board for the New Orleans Saints at 14, I am picking Olu Fashanu based off of needs and based off of the individual player that I saw. He's a man that's going to step in on day one and be your starter. He's a guy that if you needed to move over to right tackle because Ryan Ramczyk isn't ready, I believe Fashanu has that capability. And listen, we talk a lot on here that you just don't flip. This isn't Madden in real life. You just don't flip flop offensive linemen. But we have seen some players do it successfully. Kyle Turley has done it successfully. Ryan Ramczyk came out of college as predominantly a left tackle at Wisconsin, if my memory serves correctly. And a lot of people felt like he was going to be moved to left tackle. His first couple years after his first couple years in New Orleans, he became a fixture at right tackle. Fashanu has that kind of interchangeable, dominant type of blocking ability. He is my pick if everybody is available at 14.
John says, Fashanu, is he the guy who gave up 0 sacks in 4 seasons?
No, but he's in the single digits, and you don't have to use your thumb. I think the guy hold on.
The Bob Rose draft guy. You really need to print these sometime.
John Butler keeps telling me that too.
Type them up into a PDF. But Bob, if you were to do that, you would need something called a laptop.
Yeah.
Super scary. Anna says Bob's got a real issue with Penn State. There's probably a backstory to that. I'll let Bob share that backstory if he feels so comfortable.
Anna, I went to Penn State.
Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Yeah, that's my issue with Penn State. I was associated with the athletic program at Penn State, not football. Associated with the athletic program at Penn State. So you can call me bitter if you want, but I prefer to call it how I see it. James Franklin is a person who should be, peddling scratch-off lotto tickets outside of a gas station because he's not smart enough to be hired in the gas station.
He was like a very highly touted college coach there for a while too.
Yeah, you know where? Vanderbilt.
I'm just saying. All right. Well, that's Bob's analysis of offensive linemen in this draft. Bob, I'll tell you what. There's a lot of different ways the Saints could go here. However, you mentioned James Hurst still on the roster. We're still waiting to see what's going on with Andrews Pete. Is he going to be back? Is he not going to be back? It's a lot of money the Saints are going to have to eat if he does come back. Or really either way. The Saints are eating money. It's just a matter of how much money do you really want to be designating to Andrews Pete. Is there any free agents left that you feel could at least compete for one of the tackle spots?
Mekhi Becton, I believe, as we speak tonight, is still a free agent. He has played some good football in this league for a handful of years. Becton is a guy who, frankly, I am surprised has not been signed. 2 weeks ago on Under the Dome, someone brought him up, and I said at the time that I thought he had signed with the Cincinnati Bengals. I was proven wrong. So I'll eat crow on that. So assuming Mekhi Becton is still unsigned, I think that would be a heck of an addition. And you mentioned Andrews Pete. Pete, obviously, as most of you know, filled in very well for Trevor Penning last year when Penning was benched at left tackle. If Pete's brought back, he would be brought back either to take her spot at left guard or Penning's spot or push Penning for a job at left tackle. Whenever Pete has been plugged into the right tackle spot, and this includes the day that he was drafted out of Stanford. He was drafted as a right tackle, remember. He was an utter failure over on that side. Becton, on the other hand, has played right tackle and has played at a pretty high level. So if they bring in a guy like Becton, that tells you where their thoughts are on Ryan Ramczyk's potential recovery or potential availability, shall I say. I think that would be very telling. But nonetheless, I think Mekhi Becton would be a nice pickup.
Flip it to the defensive side. We've talked about safety a good bit. We've talked about defensive tackle a good bit. Defensive tackle is one of those spots where it's interesting, I think it's the most interesting position of need for the Saints because you already have a solidified, I don't want to say star, but you already have a solidified young piece
Mm-hmm.
that, knock on wood, should be a part of your rotation for a long time. However, there's a little bit of a drop after that in terms of guys that are specialists, whether it be run stuffers, whether it just be average NFL defensive tackles. Bob, if you get to a point with this draft where a guy like Sweat from Texas is there, is that the direction you go? Can you justify taking a defensive tackle before you take an offensive tackle?
Can I justify that? No, absolutely not. Offensive tackle is hands down, without a doubt, no gray area here, the number one need on your team. But if I get my offensive tackle in the first round at 14 and my next pick comes around at 45, where the Saints are in the second round, and Tavondre Sweat from Texas is still on that board, I am setting Usain Bolt type of speed records, rushing that name up to getting that name up to corrupt Commissioner Roger Goodell. I can't justify taking a guy like Sweat over an offensive tackle. However, I can and will justify taking Sweat over every other position on the board. The reason being, again, when I said it in the earlier segment, Sweat is that kind of guy, like anywhere between 340, 360 pounds, depending on what he ate before the weigh-in, or what day it is. He's a Vita Vea type of player. For you older football fans, he's a Tony Saragusa, a Sam Adams type of player, a Casey Hampton for the Pittsburgh Steelers 3-4 type of player. He's the type of guy, he's not going to pretty up the stat sheet, but he is going to push that pass pocket. He is going to clog running lanes. He is going to push around interior blockers. He absolutely demands, at the very least, double team blocking, if not triple team blocking in some situations. In other words, a player like Tavondre Sweat is going to automatically open up one-on-one blocking opportunities for at least one, if not two, of your edge rushers, and possibly even some plays for Brian Brisset. Sweat, and I'm not saying I would take any defensive tackle over anybody else on the board. I'm saying I would take Tavondre Sweat because of what he could do. If he's not available in the second round, or you choose to go another direction, I still believe you get a defensive tackle a little bit later on. But again, it has to be that big-bodied type of just pure power defender that's going to collapse those pass pockets and push those blockers backwards into the ball carrier.
On that same token, because you said absolutely not, tackle is the biggest need, is there any chance you could see the Saints going tackle at 14 and then tackle at 45, or some combination of offensive linemen? And if so, why?
I don't think it would happen, but can I see it? Yeah, I can see it, because this offensive line was just this damn bad last year. And on top of that, you now have a missing hole with Andrus Peat gone, and a potential gigantic hole with Ryan Ramczyk either not being ready, or you're fairly confident that he may, it's 50-50 that he even makes it through the season intact. And if he does, what kind of player are you going to get? We've already seen a sharp decline in his performance the last 2 years, because the same mobility just isn't there. Is he going to continue to decline? In other words, I almost consider right tackle a hole because of Ryan Ramczyk's uncertainty. And again, you're now without Andrus Peat. Trevor Penning still hasn't proven anything to me, let alone any other portion of the fan base. So a bad offensive line got even worse this offseason. So if you get your tackle in the first round and your pick comes around again at 45 and you have a guy like, I don't know, Zach Zinter from Michigan, who I really like, Cooper Beebe from Northwestern, Graham Barton from Duke. Those are the top 3 guards on my board. But I can see them going guard in the 3rd or 4th round, which, by the way, they would have to trade to get to, as some of you might know. But it wouldn't shock me if they turned around and went, they got their tackle in the 1st, and as you suggested, that if they see a lineman they like in the 2nd round, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Do I think they'll do it? No, but it would. My jaw wouldn't drop if it did.
I don't think they would, and here's why. I think they've invested, I don't want to say a lot, but they've invested a little bit when it comes to Eric McCoy.
Yeah.
They've invested a little bit when it comes to Cesar Ruiz.
Yeah.
And they just invested, and you just said like a 3rd or 4th round pick. They just invested a 4th round pick in a Nick Saldiveri. So I would be surprised. Shocked? No. Nothing about and I say it laughingly because nothing about this team shocks me anymore. But I think it would be surprising because there are some other things that definitely need to be addressed. Curse of Dennis Allen on Twitter says, "What happened to the team I love?" I'll answer that question. I just need to know in which way are you referring? Like that statement goes this many different ways. There's a lot of things about this team that are not the same as they once were. And, I kind of want to close our conversation today on this because, perfect offseason filling in holes. I think one hole that didn't get talked about a lot and one hole that was really up for debate at times last year is who's the leader of this football team? Now, very easily, you and I could come up and say, well, it's got to be Demario Davis. It's got to be Cameron Jordan. But on the offensive side of the ball, there was that big 3 for a handful of years. And you had Drew, who was the vocal leader. You had Kamara, that was kind of the quiet, their side, lead by example.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a Mike Thomas who definitely showed by his actions and his passion, but also very quickly would run his mouth. And you had 3 different personalities on the offensive side of the football, 3 completely different leadership qualities. To where now you kind of look around, you're like, well, Mike's not here, Drew's gone, Derek showed some questionable signs of leadership. Yeah, questionable. Yeah, you could pull out a full thesaurus of words for that throughout last year. And there were times where it looked like Alvin Kamara was just kind of more hands off and just said, this isn't my job anymore to be the leader of the team. So with that, Bob, where do the Saints go there? Is that a maybe underrated piece of the puzzle, is finding that leader for this team again?
They have found him, at least their opinion. They want Derek Carr to be that leader, not just of the offense, but of the football team. Whether we agree with it or not, whether we think it's a good fit or not, that's just fact. And is that the answer? No, not that we've seen so far. Do they want it to be the answer? They being the Saints. That answer is a resounding yes. That they want Derek Carr to be the leader, and they're forcing the issue a little bit. Dennis Allen, even in his press conferences, it's like they are bound and determined to fit this square peg into the round hole. Now, if you hammer it enough, folks, I know the saying is you can't do it, but if you have a big enough hammer and you hit hard enough, you can. And that's essentially what we're seeing right now. We've seen star players in the past with other franchises win out, when it comes to the battle of wills, whether it's between the coaches or player versus player. Well, you mentioned Mike Thomas. Michael Thomas lost this one. And it was, to use a boxing phrase, it was an early round TKO. He never stood a chance questioning the leadership of Derek Carr, even if he was right to do so in some instances. We didn't like the way he did it, but he did it nonetheless. And you can't say he was wrong in many of the things that he said. But Mike Thomas was never going to win that battle. The battle against Dennis Allen, Derek Carr, and the franchise combined, because it was very clear the entire last season, and it was very clear early this offseason that Derek Carr is the leader they want to be in place. Therefore, Derek Carr is the leader they have in place. And just like the microcosm and the proverbial question that you asked at the beginning of the show, what's this mean for the entire Saints organization going forward? We shall see. Derek Carr is the answer, the potential answer to a lot of questions, not only performance wise, but leadership wise, and just the overall makeup of the franchise. Again, it's a long-winded answer. It's not the leader that the Saints fans want, but it's the leader that this Saints team wants. So it's the leader we got, at least for this year.
It's the leader that the Saints fans are going to get. Leader. I got to see it to believe it. And not to pat ourselves on the back, because we certainly never do that here. Never, ever. I think of the local media guys, we have definitely had his back a lot more than others, especially in his play over the back half of the season. Just my opinion. I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back, but I think we defended his play just as well as just about anybody else. Because those last 8 games, he did play well enough to put the Saints in a position to win. In terms of his leadership, we may have ate him up and tore him apart as much as anybody else.
I did. I know that.
You guys all knew where I stood. There was points in that season last year, especially when Derek got hurt, where I was like, there's clearly some disconnect. He's clearly hurt. You're paying a guy a lot of money to be a top tier backup in the league. Play him, right? We don't have to go down that rabbit hole again. But nonetheless, that's kind of where we were with Derek Carr. It's a little upsetting, a little frustrating to me. But you're right, Bob. It's just the reality of the situation, and a lot of that has to do with the relationship that DA and DC have, and the relationship they have had, and the trust that they have for each other, which on one hand is good. You want your head coach and your quarterback to trust each other.
Sure.
The problem with that is you can trust someone so blindly that you have horse blinders on, you can't see how it's affecting everything else. And that's my concern. Now, Derek could come out and in year 2 be the best teammate ever. He could be the best teammate. He could be the leader that they want and need, but I just don't see it. And that's my concern. And I don't think there's not a good answer to, well, who's the next leader of this team? Who's going to step up? Who's going to do this? Can you just sign a guy off the street? Because in all honesty, no, you really can't.
Yeah.
Like it's impossible to be like, hey, you were a great leader for a championship winning team over there. Come do it here. Locker room chemistry. When you get that many guys in a locker room, you're not just talking about the 53-man roster. You're talking about the practice squad guys. You're talking about the guys that get signed off the street for a game and then get cut. Like, there's a lot of moving parts on top of a coaching staff and training staff and this and that. And do we need to dive into the issues of players and coaching staff over the years? Do we need to dive into the issues of players and training staff over the years? We were just talking about Mike Thomas. There's a couple other friends of the show we could ask about that too. But there's so many moving parts. It's almost impossible. Like we say, like on paper or in Madden, yeah, you can bring a locker room leader in, and everybody's morale in Madden goes up 20 20 points or whatever. Like, it just doesn't work like that. I think there's going to be a short leash with this locker room this year. That's a different story for a different time.
Look, winning solves a lot of woes. Winning solves all woes, really. This Saints team gets off to a 4-0, 5-1, 6-0 start. Nobody's going to be questioning that kind of thing. Nobody ever in any on any avenue is going to be questioning Derek Carr's level of play, Derek Carr's leadership, Dennis Allen's coaching ability. None of it, because winning solves all that. And really, at period, end of story.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you could talk about it. I could talk about it. Guys that you played with that you could not stand. But if you won games, it didn't matter. Did not matter how you liked each other on or off that field. As long as you were winning, everybody was good with each other. And as soon as you started losing, fingers pointed, anger came out. And that's just the way it is. That's the way it goes. It's just sports. That's just life. If everything is, I mean, it goes for work too, right? Like regular office jobs. If the business is doing good, it doesn't matter how you are with everybody else. If business is good, everybody's good. If business is bad, then you can start pointing fingers at people. But with all that said, let's close on a little bit of dot or drop. Bob, I want to ask you this: dot or drop? The Saints will use 2 or more selections in this month's draft on offensive linemen. Dot or drop?
Dot. As I mentioned before, I don't think it'll be back to back. You bring up a good point with Saldivari, and he's a kid I like coming into the draft last year. He's a kid that I mocked. That patting on pat self on the back. He's a kid that I mocked to the Saints. And they traded up to get him in the 4th round, remember. But there's a red flag to me because even with all the offensive line problems that this team had, Saldivari couldn't see the field. So what kind of development is he going to have? I do believe the Saints will draft 2 players, but personally, I expect one to be in the 1st round. I think everybody does. But then the next one, I think that we'll see them take a guard or a tackle that they really, really like in day 3. That's how I think it's going to transpire. But I definitely think there are going to be 2 offensive linemen drafted by the New Orleans Saints in 2024. Dot or drop? We talked about receiver. We talked about defensive tackle. Dot or drop? You, Brendan, General Manager Brendan Boylan, believe that the Saints should prioritize a disruptive defensive tackle over a wide receiver in this month's draft.
I'll drop it. And here's why. As much as I think there's a defensive tackle deficiency in terms of versatile depth, I just pulled out some good words there. That was good. My college degree is smiling at me somewhere, wherever that thing is. It's in a drawer somewhere, I bet. I think what they have at defensive tackle, we talked about Brisset a little bit. And then what they have after that in Shepard, a guy who brings, some winning experience, has been on teams that have gone deep. Say what you will about Colin Saunders, but another guy with experience and I guess is a fullback now. Congratulations. Good job. Whatever, right? And there being some guys that can play outside and inside. The Saints have been known to have some bigger body guys that could do a little bit of both. I'm not in love with the depth, but I see there's enough depth and enough NFL experience to maybe make up for some things. At receiver, I don't see that. Certainly right now. You have Olave, 3rd year in the league, young guy. You have Rashid Shaheed, another young guy who burst on the scene. As a return man, and the Saints were like, hey, well, maybe we should give him a shot at receiver. He played well. I still think he could be very good in this league. inexperienced. A.T. Perry, inexperienced. Wilson, experienced, but rode the end of the bench last year. And you kind of see where I'm going with all that. Yeah, you could say, well, Brendan, you're not bringing in experience drafting a guy. No, but at least you're bringing in a level of talent that is going to elevate the room. I don't think the Saints take one in the first round or the second round, but maybe using some of those fifth-round picks to trade back into the third and get a receiver that maybe fell a little bit. That's what I'd like to see the Saints see. Okay. Dot or drop. Calvin said Sweat is better than any receiver you can get. Neither Saunders or Shepard are game changers. I agree there.
I don't know, Calvin. I'm not sure I want to see Sweat running a deep out.
You know what? I do. I love it.
I actually do. I actually do. That would be entertaining. If we're going to move Colin Saunders to fullback, you let Tavondre Sweat play a little bit of a Taysom Hill role. But all joking aside, yeah, Calvin. And there are receivers that I love in this draft between rounds 2 through 4. But Tavondre Sweat, if he's on the board, as I said before, I am setting Usain Bolt type of speed records, to get to the podium, to get his name into corrupt Commissioner Roger Goodell's hands.
I don't know if he's going to be available at 45, but if
50-50, yeah.
If we're talking about just draft board of needs at position, I still think receivers higher. All right, Bob, dot or drop. The Saints, and we've talked about this a little bit. The Saints use a day. I can't say day 2. Oh, that's tough.
Why not?
I could, but then it's too easy of an answer. The Saints use a 3rd or 4th round pick on a quarterback, dot or drop.
Well, I mean, 3rd round would be day 2, so.
Yeah, but if I just said day 2, it's a 2nd or 3rd round pick, and I feel like that's too easy of an answer. So
okay.
3rd or 4th round pick goes on to a quarterback for the Saints.
I'm still going to give the same answer as I would if you asked me about the 2nd round. I'm going to drop it. I do believe the Saints will come out of this draft with a quarterback. I do believe it'll be in day. In fact, I'm 100% convinced that if they do, it'll be in day 3. But it won't be before the 5th round. They don't have a 3rd or 4th round. It won't be in the 2nd round, as I just mentioned. I'd be willing to bet a house on that. Not my house, but a house.
You can bet mine. It's fine.
Okay. You're on. We're gonna bring that up on our draft during our draft marathon. Without a 3rd or a 4th round pick, they would have to trade. Now, I've said all offseason that's 100% what I expect them to do, or at least try their damnedest to do. They have 4 5th-round picks, 2 6th-round picks, and we know the Saints aren't afraid to burn future assets to move back into the 3rd or 4th round because they've done so, I think, for the last 4 consecutive years. If they trade into the 3rd or 4th round, it's not for a position. It's for a specific player that they see on the board that they want. If that is the case, it's going to be a player at a position of need that helps them win right now. Because winning right now is what saves Dennis Allen's job, is what saves Derek Carr's job, is what keeps us kicking the can down the road going for another year. Trading for a quarterback, it doesn't help you do that. So I do believe they'll trade into the 3rd or 4th round. It will not be for a quarterback. Their quarterback will come in the 5th, 6th, maybe even 7th round. A guy that Clint Kubiak says to Dennis Allen, I like that guy's skill set for my system. He's still on the board. Let's go get him. That's when a quarterback is going to happen. So will it happen in the 3rd or 4th round? Drop.
All right, last one to me, and then I do want to get to one question before we sign off.
Man, that's tough. Dot or drop? Yeah, this is weak on my part. I will accept the criticism, but I mean I'll throw it out there anyway, even though it's the general question. The Saints will draft a running back at any point during this draft? Dot or drop?
Dot. They always do. I don't say all. I take that, not always, but a lot of times it is and especially the amount of late round picks they have this year.
Yeah.
Even if they trade a couple, like it's right up the Saints' alley to go get a guy. You have Calvin asking about Isaiah Garendo in the 5th round, the running back. Might have butchered that name, but like 5, 6, 7, like day 3 is a perfect spot for the Saints to go. At least give a guy a shot. You might look at the roster and say, well, they got Williams, they got Kamara, they got, they got the guy they drafted last year, Kendry Miller. So, yeah, but this is also a team historically that has brought in running backs and them on practice squads, and whether they end up being good in New Orleans or somewhere else. Boston Scott's a good example. He was a 5th round or 6th round pick who didn't pan out here, but has panned out to have a pretty decent career with Philadelphia. So I could see the Saints doing something like that. Absolutely. Question I wanted to get to. No, go ahead.
Oh no, I thought Calvin's question about the kid from Louisville, I believe he was the name. I thought that was the question, so I apologize. Go on.
Oh, you're good. Question I wanted to get to from Cursive Dennis Allen on Twitter, and I wish the keyboard hands were just a little bit quicker for this, because we're talking about prioritizing defensive tackle or receiver. Keon Coleman out of Florida State, big-bodied guy at 6'4", can fit some of the needs Bob and I were talking about. If him and Sweat are sitting there at 45, are you still sprinting to the table to get Sweat, or are you having second thoughts seeing a big-bodied receiver in Coleman, who played pretty well for Florida State? You obviously saw a drop in the offensive production there after Jordan Travis's injury. But Coleman clearly one of the better receivers in the ACC, a guy that could potentially make a difference from day one.
Yeah, he could, and I wrote about Keon Coleman already. I already published my piece on Keon Coleman. I wrote about a lot of guys and just haven't published them yet, and I like him a lot. But and I think Keon Coleman will be a terrific fit in the Saints offense. I think he's going to be a very good NFL wide receiver. Probably not a number 1 guy, but definitely a solid number 2. That's his upside. With the floor being a solid rotational guy that's going to make plays in the red zone and going to make plays in the middle of the field for you. Exactly what we talked about the Saints need at the bare minimum. But for me, if Coleman and Sweat are both on the board at 45, yep, I'm running just as fast to get Sweat's name up there. I like Keon Coleman a lot. I love what T'Vondre Sweat could bring. To me, there are other wide receivers I could get later in this draft that wouldn't be as big a drop off from Coleman as other defensive tackles would be as big a drop off from Sweat and what I think Sweat can do. There's a lot of defensive tackles that are going to go maybe even late first, but certainly on day 2. That are going to be very good picks for different teams, maybe even the Saints, but not the kind of monstrous body, monstrous, powerful presence that Sweat gives. That's what I'm in love with. You guys don't know, or some of you I know do know, but some of you just don't know what that does. If you put a T'Vondre Sweat in the middle of the New Orleans Saints defense, all of those New Orleans Saints defensive linemen and linebackers are going to be grinning ear to ear from the time that pick is made until the time the first snap is taken in the regular season, because they know what that means. They know that means free path to the ball carrier. They know that means that quarterbacks are going to have a 350-pound man bearing down on them and wanting to get rid of that ball real quick before that weight hits them on the turf. It does so much for a defense that doesn't show up on a stat sheet.
There you have it. We're going to close with that brilliant analysis from Mr. Rose. We're going to get more into specifics and specific players. So with that, it's a good time to plug the Bayou Blitz on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, at Bayou Blitz Pod. You guys, throughout this week, Bob and I both monitor the account. Tweet questions to us so we can have some questions ready to answer for you guys here on the show. We love when you drop them up here in the chat. But if you guys give it to us ahead of time for next week, we can kind of plan our talking points around those questions. So please, if you are on Twitter and you have questions throughout the week, from now till next week, please, at Bayou Blitz Pod, just tag us and ask anything you want, and we will try to get to as many as possible. With that said as well, we'll be running our giveaway this week on the Bayou Blitz Podcast's official Twitter account at Bayou Blitz Pod. And that's for that Funko Pop, the Drew Brees Super Bowl 44 championship edition Funko Pop. I like Funkos. That's why we've given away 2 so far, make it 3 with another one. And guess what? These things are no longer, I guess the Funko word is vaulted, meaning they're no longer actively sold in stores.
Really?
So this particular Funko, because it was from the NFL's 100th anniversary season. So you're not going to be able to go out in the streets and find them. So you might as well get them for free from us. So make sure you follow us there for the details on how to win one.
Follow the Bayou Blitz for all your black market Funko Pop needs.
Bob, we can't openly say that. No, but throughout the year, I'm sure I'll pick up a few other ones. The fun one this year was the Saint Santa Funko Pop that came out. So we might have to give out one of those when we get to Christmas later this year. But with that, Bob, we've plugged the show enough. It means it's time to plug you and your work. Where can people follow you as we get closer and closer to the draft for some of, if not the best, in draft coverage?
I appreciate the compliment. And, folks, Brendan and I both appreciate you guys tuning in with us, especially you guys that do so week in and week out. But we've had newcomers, a lot of newcomers to the chats, lately, and we're, eternally grateful for you guys as well. And make sure you do follow that Bayou Blitz Twitter page at Bayou Blitz Pod, and don't forget about the Bayou Blitz Facebook page as well. Simply Bayou Blitz. Our numbers have been kind of stagnant, as far as membership on that Facebook group. So make sure you get other Saints fans over onto Facebook, or if they are on Facebook, steer them towards that group. In the meantime, we are still having some publishing issues at the Saints News Network, so bear with us. I truthfully have. I have prospects upon prospects that I have notes and articles, manually written out on that I just haven't had a chance to get published yet because of those issues. But we still have a couple weeks before the draft, so we're going to get them out to you as best we can, and also a lot of talking points for our 3-day draft marathon special, which will tell you, Brendan and I will tell you more about next week. But you can follow me, John Hendricks, and Kyle T. Mosley and Ross Jackson, at the Saints News Network, at Saints News on Twitter, and Saints News Network on Facebook as well. Individually, I could be followed on Facebook, Bob Rose, and Twitter at Bobby R2613. I publish my articles on both those personal pages, as well as the Saints News Network page.
For myself, you can follow me virtually everywhere at BT Boylan. I got to throw up this comment because it's an interesting one, Bob. I don't know how many people would get into this giveaway, but our friend Sean Butler asks, when do the people get the Boylan and Rose Funko Pops? So here's the thing, John, and don't tempt me. Maybe we'll send some just to John. But Funko now has an option on their website called Funko Yourself.
No.
They will make a custom Funko for you if you submit a photo of yourself. So, John, if you really want to make a donation to get these things made, we will send you some Funkos of Bob and I just for giggles. He said, oh, hell yes. Okay, we will talk. I'll throw us all in like a group chat or something. We'll talk. That would be funny. The official Bayou Blitz Funko Pops. Oh man, don't even get us started. Don't even get us started. This could end very poorly.
Oh yeah, I mean just the opening phrase of "Go Funko yourself" is enough for me to play on an entire show.
Oh my god. Oh, and then Calvin says, "LOL, that would be epic." Okay, maybe we do. Maybe we do give some out before the start of the season. Maybe we get some custom Funkos made. Um, God, you guys are awesome and terrible
You are.
at the same time because you open up a world of possibilities for Bob and I to get in trouble. You really do. You really do. So between that and getting some hats that say "Dot or Drop," I think we got some merch stuff coming in, Bob, for all those fans that we've been getting the last few weeks. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with us this week. Bob and I will be back at our usual Wednesday night slotted time, 9 o'clock Eastern next week. We'll give you some updates about our draft show. We have a couple guests joining us throughout our 3-day marathon telecon, whatever we call it. We will continue with our live count of made up words. I don't remember all the counts we had last year. I remember made up words specifically. Like we had like 7 or 8 made up words by the end of it.
We did. Eno Benjamin mentions Roger Goodell 8 references.
That was my guy, and I hate he got hurt, but that was my guy. I really thought he had a shot to make the team. So yeah, random mentions of guys that may not even make the team. Maybe Keith Kirkwood mentions this year. My guy from Neptune Township. But until next week, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you tweet your questions to us throughout the week and follow the Twitter page to get in on the Drew Brees Funko Pop giveaway. Not quite the Boylan and Rose Funko Pop giveaway, but we'll get there at some point. But until then, find some peace, spread love, practice positivity. See you next time for the Bayou Blitz.